Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. I've been fortunate enough to cover up to 20 Final Fours and a couple World Series and multiple Super Bowls and all kinds of fantastic things. But there's no doubt that one of the most fun assignments I ever had was the play-by-play announcer at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And that was for 7 years, and especially for the 6 years that Rich Zvosek was the head coach. We shared all kinds of long bus rides and times after games and coaches' shows and pre- and post-game interviews for all those years, and he couldn't have been a better coaching companion, and he was just great fun, always energetic, could be a little fiery at times also, and it were great times for UMKC. They had some sellout crowds, they had some great conference success, but the conference tournament success eluded him, and eventually that would cost Rich Zvosek his job in 2007. He decided to take some time off, reassess things, and since then has had great gratification and success as a college administrator, a television personality with color announcing duties, as well as an actor. And he continues to do those things to this day. But his rise in the coaching profession, actually in the low and middle ranks, is really a fascinating tale. A person who wanted to be a coach from the time he was in the 8th grade, the son of a football coach. His attention was turned to basketball, and he made it a big part of his life for almost 50 years. It still is a part of his life, but not as a coach. His coaching tales, his other tales, his youthful tales, and his sense of humor are all on display straight ahead on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing. We're here with Joe Spiker, the CEO and president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you had a great year in 2019, a record year. 2020 comes, things are moving smoothly along, and then the coronavirus comes. But your company seemed to be very ready, very proactive, and very ready to serve your customers well.
Yeah, we adopted social distancing very early before the cities even put out the notices. And we started working from home. We are largely cloud-based as a company, so that transition was easy. Our technicians are wearing masks and gloves, and salespeople are not meeting with homeowners. We're doing everything digitally and doing everything we can to do our part to get over this as quickly as possible.
So for any needs that people have right now, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, you can always call us, 913-257-5426. But the best way is to go to eastonroofing.com, put your information in, and we'll give you a call.
Easton Roofing. Integrity matters. Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Vision's goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300. Let's spend a minute with Dr. Brad Woodle, who along with his wife, Dr. Christina Woodle, the owners of Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture, my home for chiropractic care. And first of all, just tell us about the wide range of services you offer.
Danny, we offer comprehensive chiropractic, acupuncture, physiotherapy, and rehab. We do a very thorough examination, x-rays on site as necessary, and we have a full rehabilitation department, so we can help out with exercises, stretches, different therapies for the complex, but also the very simple conditions we treat.
You have been deemed essential and have remained open all through this COVID-19 process. What are some of the things you've done to make sure that was the case?
From the very beginning, in March, we started to make sure that we were cleaning and sanitizing with EPA-registered sanitizing products. We also implemented masks way before the state required them. We implemented a parking lot waiting room, took out half of the chairs in our waiting room, and made sure to space out visits so we could appropriately meet, discuss, and also screen patients to make sure we were taking care of healthy people.
Find out more about Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture and how they can help you at asfca.com.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Rich, you were born in Lorain, Ohio, and you stayed there all through your childhood and graduated from Lorain Catholic High School. What was it like to be 6-year-old, say, Rich Zvosek in Ohio?
Well, it was interesting. Lorain, at that point in time, was a bustling steel mill town, U.S. Steel, Ford plant, shipyards, about 100,000 people. And it was a great place to grow up. It really was. I mean, big enough so that you got a variety of different things to do and competition, and yet small enough that very neighborhood oriented.
What were your parents, what was your family life like?
So I've got an older brother and older sister. Neither of them really went into sports, although my sister did play volleyball in high school. That's about the extent of it, considering that my father was a high school football coach and track coach. It's kind of unusual that neither of my brother or sister went into athletics. But, like most kids growing up in that era, I played, whatever season it was, that's what sport I played, whether it's baseball, football, basketball. And kind of played that up until freshman year in high school. And then, as a freshman football player, my high school coach broke my nose in a practice, not intentionally, of course. But at that point, I thought, maybe I want to play football. And then, in playing baseball, I was a first baseman. And we had a guy who played third base who was a pitcher who later went on to Arizona State. He used to love to throw me breaking balls to first base. And at that point, I was like, I need to concentrate on a bigger ball that bounces correctly. So I gave up those two sports. My father, who, as I mentioned, was actually a high school football coach at a different school. He was in the public school system. Mm-hmm. And, he was like, oh, okay, are you going to be a quitter? Are you going to quit everything? And I said, no, I'm going to concentrate on basketball. I love it, and I'm going to try and make the varsity as a sophomore, which at that point in the history of high school, I think we had only had 3 other sophomores make varsity. So it was a good goal. But I'll kind of digress for a moment to the whole growing up aspect. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, my father was a high school football coach. He actually played for Woody Hayes at Miami of Ohio. And his teammates were Bo Schembechler and Eric Parsegian.
Wow.
So for me growing up, it was, we went to 3 football games every year. We went to one at Notre Dame, one at Michigan, one at Ohio State, because of the relationships that my father had with his former teammates and of course, Coach Hayes. So, I mean, I was living in an athletic dreamland in that respect. And it kind of kept me on the straight and narrow, so to speak.
So did you make the varsity as a sophomore?
I did. So I was a 3-year letterman as a basketball player at Lorain Catholic. Graduated, and I know, Danny, you're not going to believe this one, but I graduated as the all-time leading rebounder.
Whoa.
Which, I can get up in the air.
That doesn't surprise. That really doesn't surprise me. I'll say that. And
it really was more about being scrappy. And I mean, in those days, you know, if you were one of the bigger kids on the team, and I was basically almost 6'4" when I was in 8th grade.
Okay.
And I thought I was going to be 6'7", 6'8". I was, you know, big time. And realistically, I grew maybe another quarter of an inch. And that was about it. So it was a case where, okay, we'll stick Rich inside. And that's where he worked at. So that's kind of what I did.
So when you were getting towards the end of high school, you ended up playing college basketball, but I was at Defiance College. What was the whole process of ending up at Defiance?
Well, it's interesting to note in this day and age of of transfers in college basketball, I may have been ahead of my time. I played my freshman year at Baldwin Wallace for a guy named Bob Rupert, who at the end of the year then got the job at Akron University. And when that happened, I decided, you know what, I'm going to transfer. And I had a former high school teammate who was a couple years ahead of me who had played at Defiance. So he made the introduction to the coach there. And at that point in my life, I mean, well, realistically, from 8th grade on, I wanted to be a basketball coach, a college basketball coach. So when I visited Defiance, you know, my only question to the head coach there, a guy by the name of Marv Hohenberger, was simply, can you get me a graduate assistant's job when I graduate from Defiance? And I wasn't worried about playing time or who's starting or shots or minutes. I was looking at, hey, can you get me into college coaching? And he said yes. And I decided to go to Defiance. Coach Hohenberger held true to his word. He got me a graduate assistant's position at Bowling Green State University, actually about a half hour up the road from Defiance, and started my coaching career. Actually, I got to tell you the truth, Danny, I can't lie. I was not a very good college player.
Okay, I was going to get into that.
So my senior year, Coach Hohenberger called me in, and he said, hey, Rich, he says, you got a choice here. You know, you can either sit on the bench this year in your uniform, or you can sit on the bench in a coat and tie and start your coaching career. And back in those days, you had JV programs. So I had a chance to coach the junior varsity. So it's funny. I'll never forget, like most college guys, I mean, I worked hard all summer. I thought I should have played. Everybody thinks they should play more minutes. You know how that goes.
Sure.
So I did what most college guys would do. I told them to shove it. I walked out of the office, and I got drunk for about a week. And, you know, and then one day I'm sitting in the room, and one of my roommates was a guy by the name of Donnie Martindale. Wink Martindale is what we called him back then.
Right.
Now everybody calls him Donnie. He's actually the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. He looked at me and says, Rich, where do you think you're going to play next year? He said, all we've heard since you've been here is how you're going to be, you know, this great college basketball coach. Here's a guy who's giving you an opportunity. So I listened to his advice. I went back in and apologized to Coach Hohenberger, and to his credit, he never looked back. He never held a grudge. He said, Rich, we'll love to have you. And that's truly how my coaching career began.
What was it like coaching JV when, you know, coaching guys who were really, they'd been around you, obviously, in a basketball setting, and they're only maybe a year or two younger than you?
It was interesting, but, you know, it was really a case of, you know, I didn't go out to parties with them, obviously, during the season. That would have made it a little difficult. But it really was, you know, I had a sense of purpose about me. And I think that really helped. At that point in time, every summer, I would go work about 9 or 10 weeks of college basketball camps across the country. I'd go back east to Syracuse and UConn and up in Maryland at Mason-Dixon camp run by the legendary Morgan Wooten from DeMatha High School, Virginia camp, Notre Dame, Purdue. So I had those exposures to those college coaches, and it gave me some credibility when I came back on campus. And, and it was funny to hear, like, one of my former teammates, who I was now coaching, and he made the comment, he says, Rich, he says, I don't understand how you can go do that all summer. He says, that's the time you're supposed to enjoy yourself. And, he was referring to, he was playing, in some softball league in this summer. But for me, that's what I was looking forward to doing. I was looking forward to preparing myself to coach college basketball. And those weeks on the road and those contacts I made at all the camps and the experiences I had, I can probably trace just about every job that I got to somebody I met at one of those college camps.
Yeah. Do you, what was your social life and the other aspect of your college time?
Pretty much like any normal college kid, you hung out in Defiance. It wasn't a very big campus, a couple thousand students, but the good news was Bowling Green was only a half hour down the road, and they did have a ratio of I think it was 3-to-1 girls to guys. So even a guy who is a little challenged like myself can find companionship.
Well, so you start your career in the way you just described, and you would be a pretty fast-track person as far as your college. Oh, first of all, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you wanted to be a coach from the time of 8th grade or so. Was any of that impact because your dad was a coach, and did that kind of inspire you, or did you say more like, hey, he can do it, I can do it, or what was the inspiration for you, or just the love of basketball?
It really was my father. And what I witnessed was the relationships that he built with his players through the years. And I thought, this is kind of neat. He's making an impact, and probably him. And, I had some great grade school coaches, Weaver and Don Williamson, two guys who coached the youth teams, but didn't have a son on those teams. And those guys really made an impact as well. But it really came down to my dad. It really did. I saw what he did and how he loved it, was passionate, and the passion rubbed off.
So you spend that year, your final year of college coaching, and tell us about the few years that you spent as an assistant before you hit the head coaching ranks quite early.
I tell you, I was very fortunate. I worked the year at Bowling Green under John Weiner, who was a terrific game coach. I mean, he did some things in games that just worked extremely well. Now, wasn't a guy who loved practice. Matter of fact, I'm not sure we did much in practice at all. But he also taught me the value of having good players. And the year I was at Bowling Green, we had a guy, Colin Irish, who was drafted by the then Washington Bullets. A guy named Joe Fain, who was drafted by the Sixers, and a guy named David Jenkins, who was actually drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, even though he never played football in college. So we had some talent, and it really emphasized that point of, hey, the better players you have, the better coach you are. So I kind of tried to keep that philosophy my entire coaching career, but it really gave me a good head start. There was full-time assistant at that point by the name of Bruce Brown, who I really learned a lot from. He just passed away from cancer here recently. And he really kind of taught me the nuts and bolts of things. And I'll be forever indebted to him as well. And then, after my graduate assistant position, my first, I guess, full-time coaching position would be at Atlantic Christian College, which is now Barton College in Wilson, North Carolina. A guy by the name of Gary Edwards actually hired me. It was his first head coaching job. He was 25. I was 22. I'm not really sure why he hired me, though, the way our interview went. He actually flew to Columbus. And as I mentioned, I was at Bowling Green at the time, so Columbus is about an hour and change away. So I meet him in the Columbus airport, and he's got a short period of time. He's going to interview me, and then he's flying out. Well, I didn't realize at the time that Columbus Airport had parking lots on either side. So I parked my car and go in, meet him, and we go out the other side as we're going to go to a restaurant, and we spend basically the next 45 minutes looking for my car. And then I finally realized, oh my God, there's two sides to this. So by that time, he's got to catch his flight back down to Raleigh, and I'm thinking, oh, this is it. This guy's going home, and he called it our mutual friend, Mike Boyack, and saying, hey, you just set me up with a guy who loses his car. How can I hire him? Well, fortunately, Gary took a chance. He hired me. We've been lifelong friends ever since. And basically, the team had won 4 games the year prior. So we went about the job of overhauling it. We brought in 10 kids. And it really gave me so much experience and got me on my way, because basically for 3 weeks in the fall, I went on the road and did home visits by myself with high school kids in Virginia, and kind of worked my way up into my contact areas in Illinois and Indiana and Ohio. And, spent 3 weeks on the road, and all these kids, high school kids, and I come back, and he sits me down. He says, all right, Rich, you got the sales pitch down, because now we're going to recruit transfers and junior college players, because we're not going to wait around for guys to develop. I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. So we brought in 10 new players, 2 of which actually were high school guys. And, some junior college players. The first guy I ever signed was, ironically enough, a guy from my hometown, Ricky Melendez, who was a junior college kid of Puerto Rican descent. You can recognize the name. So we go do the home visit with him. His mother, who we affectionately named Mama Melendez, a big woman, nice, but So I tell the head coach, Coach Edwards, I say, listen, this is a done deal. Ricky played on my summer league teams growing up. He's in the bag. Just don't do anything that can screw this up. So, of course, the other school out of Erie, Pennsylvania, which is only about, 2.5 hours from Lorraine. And the first words out of Coach Edwards' mouth to Mama Melendez when she says, well, I really like Gannon, and they're close by. And Coach Edwards says, well, it's right through the snow belt. What, are you going to follow a snowplow to Erie to watch your son play? And the woman blows up. She says, well, I'm from Buffalo, and we take care of each other. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. The easiest recruit we had, I could see slipping away. When we walk out, and Ricky follows us out, and he says, hey, Coach, don't worry. He says, I I got this. My mom's not going to make this decision. I'm making the call. And then he says, by the way, is there any chance you can help me get my girlfriend into school? And I'm thinking, sure, why not? So I said, just tell her to send her application and her transcript, and I'll walk it over. Well, the fact of the matter, she was a very good student. So it was a heck of a lot easier getting her into school than it was Ricky. But Ricky turned out to be a terrific player, ended up graduating, playing 10 years professionally down in Puerto Rico. But, it was interesting because, you try and use your contacts, and sometimes they come true. And sometimes it's a small world basketball-wise because you never know who you meet, who's going to help you along the way. And when I was a camper at Five Star Camp when I was in high school, there was a coach by the name of Howie Landa who was the head coach at Mercer Community College in New Jersey, won 2 national titles at the junior college level. Well, I go to see him and watch his team work out, and he says, "Hey, Rich," he says, "what are you doing New Year's Eve?" I said, "I don't know." He says, "Well, my best player is ineligible right now, and if you want to see him, if you come New Year's Eve, we're going to scrimmage, and I can basically help you get him." And I told him, I said, "Well, I know what I'm doing New Year's Eve. I'm driving to Trenton, New Jersey from Wilson, North Carolina." So sure enough, I show up. I'm the only coach in the gym. They're scrimmaging. The player's name was Ed Boone, who was a terrific player out of the Bronx. And, Howie rewarded hard work, and I was the only guy there, so he helped us get Ed. Ed was a good player for us, and had a good 2-year career for us. And basically those 10 guys, the next 2 years, won a total of 50 games. 25 games each year, made it to Kansas City, ironically enough, to the NAI National Tournament. The only downside was I didn't get a chance to coach any of them. As I worked there the 1 year, recruited all the players, and then got a job at Loyola College in Baltimore as my first job, just at the Division I level. Worked for a terrific Mark Amatucci, who was kind of a legendary high school coach in Baltimore. Calvert Hall High School had Dwayne Farrell at Georgia Tech, Juan Dixon from Maryland.
Right.
Were 2 of probably his most prolific guys. So 3 years under him, and then managed to get the head coaching job at St. Francis College in Brooklyn.
You were only 27 years old when you managed to get that job. You always have a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. I can't even imagine that you don't interview tremendously well in most situations. How do you think you're able to get that job so young?
Well, it was a couple of things that worked in my favor. The Pope worked in my favor, the Pope being Polish, and it was by the name of Carlo Tramontosi. Was a hardcore Italian, soccer coach at the time as well as the AD. And for some reason, he thought I was Polish, and because the Pope was Polish, he instantly liked me. I don't know. The other truth is, St. Francis was not a very good job. It was a situation where they hadn't had a winning season in 2 decades. And not a lot of people wanted that job. It was basically a commuter school. There were no dorms, no parking. The building was a block long, 7 stories high, gym on the 3rd floor. And a big part of the job was finding the kids a place to live every year. But it was a great chance to cut my teeth as a head coach, and really get a lot of experience, and it opened up a lot of pathways for me.
Well, the next pathway was North Florida. You stayed there for 6 years. What was that experience like?
You know, it was totally different. I mean, 3 years in Brooklyn was life-changing, to say the least. I mean, and then, like a lot of people who live in New York, they moved to Florida. It was an opportunity to start a program from scratch. And basically the first year, all we did is recruit and market the program. The toughest question I always had was, well, when are they going to start a football program? Well, you know, we were in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, the home of the Gator Bowl and the biggest cocktail party in America, the Georgia-Florida game.
Right.
But I'm the basketball coach. So I didn't really want to answer that question, or care to be asked it, I should say. But it was good, and it taught kind of teaching the game, because whenever you go into a program, you always have a core group of players that are returning from the previous coaching staff, so there is some sort of cohesion. But in this case, it was a chance to put your stamp on everything. So, you know, it was eye-opening, to say the least. But it was a good run. I was there for 6 years, as you mentioned, and the whole reason I took it, I mean, we were Division II, but the athletic director, when he hired me, you know, had said, hey, you're going to be Division II for a couple of years, and then we're going to move Division I and join which is now the Atlantic Sun. Back then it was the Trans-American. The teams like Jacksonville and Stetson. And so, to me, it wasn't much of a gamble to go to St. Francis to North Florida, because we were going to go Division I. Well, after 6 years, I realized that wasn't going to happen. That the administration decided, you know, we like being Division II at this point. So, you know, at that point, I decided, hey, I gotta try and get back up north, get back where most of my contacts are, and that'll help me work my way back into the Division I level. So, you know, North Florida is, I guess, probably the closest we got to get into the NCAA tournament. We lost in the championship game one year when my best two players collided. We were up 3 with about 2 minutes to go in the game, and they collided, and the one guy who was the tournament MVP had no idea where he was for the next 2 minutes. If there would have been a doctor on the bench and concussion protocols back then, he probably wouldn't have been in the game. And the other guy, who was the leading scorer in the game, broke a bone right above his eye, so he was out. And it came down to pretty much a final shot, and we missed and stayed home. But, you know, it was a good run. And from there went to Millersville in Pennsylvania as the head coach, to try and get back up north. Worked my way back into Division I. Was in Millersville a year, and then went 2 years or 3 years as an assistant at St. Peter's in Jersey City, American in D.C., and then out to UMKC.
So you're down south for a little bit, but generally you're working in the Northeast corridor. What led you to Kansas City?
A job. It's funny. I took the job at St. Peter's as an assistant, and all my friends said, Rich, you're committing professional suicide. The guy at St. Peter's, ironically, what it transpired is his assistant was my former assistant at St. Francis. He takes a job as a head coach in Division III. I called to congratulate him. The head coach answers the phone, and I knew the head coach, a guy by the name of Roger Blinn, And we start talking, and he says, "Hey, Rich, would you be interested?" I'm like, "I don't really know." He says, "We'll drive up, and we'll talk, and at least that way you can figure it out." So I drove up about 2 hours and 15 minutes from Millersville, Pennsylvania, to Jersey City, New Jersey. And when I was there, I accepted the job, and then spent the next 2 hours trying to figure out how to tell my wife that I was taking the job at St. Peter's. Because we had 3 little kids, and she wasn't going to move to Jersey City at that point. So I was there a year, and the reason going back to what I said initially about my friend saying it's committing professional suicide, St. Peter's had lost their last 10 games of the year, the previous year, and the head coach was heading into the last year of his contract. So they were like, "Rich, he's getting fired. You don't do it." And so I took the chance anyhow. I'm glad I didn't listen, because it all works out in the end. But I took the job. They had an apartment for me on campus, but basically once we got to Christmas time, I was making that drive round trip 2 hours and 15 minutes one way to basically save my marriage, because my wife was not going to handle all 3 kids by herself every single day. So it was 3 long days. You get up at 5 or 6 o'clock, you drive, you get home about 8 or 9 or 10, and then do it all over again. But it was it was good. And then at the end of that year, we actually made it to the conference championship game. So the head coach, Roger, got a contract extension. My wife told me there's no way this commuting is going to work, and there's no way I'm moving to Jersey City. So I took a job at American University for a great guy by the name of Art Berry, who was a good player at American. I thought it was not a gamble at all. So we moved to Rockville, Maryland, just outside of D.C., and lo and behold, they bought him out at the end of the year, even though we had more wins and advanced further in the conference tournament than they ever had. So come June, July, I'm looking for a coaching job, and through a mutual friend, I hooked up with Dean Demopoulos, who had just gotten the head coaching job at UMKC. And Dean had been a longtime assistant for John Chaney. It was his first go-round as a head coach. So he felt like he needed to have somebody with some head coaching experience. And over a visit to the ABCD camp in New Jersey, he offered me the job, and I came out to Kansas City.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
I'm here with Tim Emerson, the owner of Emerson & Company. And Tim, give us an idea of the range of services that you provide from Emerson & Company.
At Emerson & Company, we do credit card processing, payroll services. We do bookkeeping, merchant accounts like point-of-sale systems.
What would you say differentiates you from other companies in the field, and what makes you special?
I think what makes us unique is that we're a small local business making regional decisions on companies. We create a profile for the business and then put it out to our different vendors in a very competitive environment and tailor those needs to the specific business, which usually ends up in a great fit or great result for the company.
And, of course, the idea is to save money, right?
Save money, and actually sometimes I'm surprised where actually a solution that may cost a little bit more ultimately does save money, but we're not conditioned to think like that sometimes.
Emerson & Company. Check them out at emerson-co.com or call them at 816-360-9092.
Hi, everybody. This is Matt Llewellyn from 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence. I just want to thank everybody for supporting local restaurants during this time of uncertainty. 23rd Street Brewery is now open until this pandemic is over. And right now, more than anything, local restaurants need your help and support. Come on out and see us. 23rd Street Brewery is open now from 11:30 till 9 o'clock for dine-in and carry-out. Whatever we can do to help you out, maybe with your catering needs, too. I appreciate all the support, and thank you for continuing to shop local.
We're visiting with Larry Marshall, former Chiefs defensive back and punt returner, and now a Chiefs ambassador. Larry is a former pro football player with the aches and pains that come with that, and moving on in age as we all are. What do the Canaway CBD products do for you?
It's been a great relief for me. Being a punt and kickoff returner, collisions were a mainstay of my career, and these Canaway products, the salve especially, has really helped me try to get through every day with the aches and pains that I've had over a career of 7+ years in the NFL.
I get similar benefits as well, particularly with my back. Certainly wasn't a football player. What's the best way for our listeners to get more information about the great products themselves?
Well, I'm so enthused about it, Dana. If they just contact me at larrymarshall.canaway.com, and I can give them all the information they need to help them get through the day as well.
Start gaining all the benefits that Larry and I do from the trusted and reliable line of Canaway products. As Larry said, visit larrymarshall.canaway.com and get information on all the great products from Canaway. If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Our guest is Rich Zvosek. He's a longtime friend of mine and part of really one of the greatest stretches of my broadcast career was spending the 6 years with Rich Zvosek. We'll get into that a little bit later. You mentioned the trials and tribulations of family life with a coach that's trying to climb the basketball ladder and making many stops. First of all, how did you meet your wife?
So she was the head lacrosse coach and field hockey coach at Loyola College. And I'm just thankful that she stooped to a lowly assistant. It's interesting because she was having good years at Loyola. And when I got the job at St. Francis, she gave up her coaching career. And she's actually the talent in the family. She was a All-American lacrosse player at Maryland. She played on the U.S. team for 10 years. She was an MVP of a World Cup. So, she definitely had the talent from that standpoint. But I'm just fortunate that she has stuck with me all these years.
So what were your first impressions of Kansas City?
Very underrated. I had come to Kansas City for a Final Four and had been out there a couple times before, but never really spent any amount of time. And it was just a great area. And to this day, I just think, UMKC has so much potential that to be good, even though for the most part, your alums are either from Missouri or from Kansas or Kansas State. I think you can carve out a niche, and it's a great, it's a good nightlife. It's, of course, I had three young kids when I moved out there, so I didn't really partake in the nightlife until I was done coaching. But it was a great place to raise a family.
That's a sort of a standard answer that people give about Kansas, and it says a lot about the community, to say the least. Well, I imagine you didn't think that becoming the lead assistant for someone who was just starting his first season was going to be a gateway to becoming a head coach again after just one season. I know the circumstances of this, but what happened that moved you right into that slot after just 1 year?
Well, it was a roller coaster ride in the spring. Dean, obviously they had a lot of success at Temple when he was the lead assistant there. And the year that we had with him as the head coach, I want to say we led the country in fewest turnovers. We were right up there in scoring defense. Had a big win over Nebraska. So he was actually offered the job at St. Bonaventure. And, at that point in time, if he's taking the St. Bonaventure job, then I'm going with him because there's no way UMKC is going to hire me because, just now speaking as an administrator, the administrator doesn't mind losing a guy to the NBA, but they would look at St. Bonaventure, even though basketball people would say they're a higher level. But still, it would be kind of lateral in that sense. So I was all set. I thought we were going to Olean, New York, and I was moving again. And, you know, the president didn't approve it, so it ended up falling apart. And I'm thinking, all right, back in Kansas City for another year. And lo and behold, about 2 or 3 weeks later, the NBA had changed their rules on zone defense. And a friend of his from the Seattle Supersonics had called and asked if he would be interested. So he took the job with Seattle. And now I'm sitting there thinking, oh, my God, I don't know where I'm going. Because at that point in time, I'm thinking, you know, they're going to hire somebody else. You know, it wasn't like we went to the NCAA tournament and we had a long run and continuity would then take hold. But I appreciate Bob Thomas giving me a chance, making me the head coach. He made me sweat for a couple of weeks. But, you know, I'm grateful that he pulled the trigger and gave me an opportunity.
You had a great first year. In fact, most of the time you had really good conference records. You left with the best winning percentage in school history. Every year except one, the last one, unfortunately, you had at least a 500 record in conference play. You're a coach who played a lot of matchup zone and stress defense, and obviously you didn't exclusively do that. But your teams pretty much always had a big-time scorer. Was that by design or just the way it worked out?
You know, we always tried to play through one guy. My first year, we tried to play through Michael Jackson, who was an all-conference player, a terrific player. And then it kind of morphed. I'd like to try and create advantage-disadvantage situations, either through throwing the ball into the post, creating a double-team situation, or try and get a second guy to run at a shooter, i.e. Mike Watson. You know, and because of that, I think, you know, you had some guys who scored more than others. But probably perhaps the best team was a group with Michael English and Carlson, Aaron, and Temple, Tim Blackwell, Quentin Day, which was, you know, that group was kind of a fulfillment of what we tried to do in the first few years of laying some foundation, of recruiting some guys from Kansas City, but maybe you don't get them the first time and they come back, and that's what Blackwell and Quentin Day did. And then, you know, mixing them in with some other players. You know, a guy like Blake Crawford, who was a local guy. Brian Gettinger, who was a local guy. And just a good, solid group of kids.
You had consecutive seasons in 04 and 05 and 05-06 of 12-4 and 11-5 in conference play, but never were able to get over the hump in conference tournament. That must have been especially frustrating because you had some teams that certainly were capable of that.
It really was. If there's one regret, it's that's the regret. I mean, we always, you know, we could get past that first round, but we couldn't get into the championship game. And it haunts me to this day. I can still see my last game as the head coach there. We're playing in Oakland, and we're in control of the game, but it's back and forth, and we're up one with probably about a minute and change to go. And all we got to do is get one stop, and it's free throw shooting time, and we move on. And I can still remember the play. They ran a cross screen. Brian Gettinger got crushed on the screen, and they had a three-point shooter who knocked it down. We came down and missed, and and then it was foul shooting time for them. But you know, as much as some of the losses stick with coaches, so do the wins. You know, I think back, we had some pretty good wins and pretty good runs.
The one really super memorable night was the night in December 2003 when you played Kansas State. It was 8:10 WHB night. The place was almost full. Some of that was obviously some K-State fans were there, but it was a packed house. My wife sang the national anthem that evening, and you absolutely annihilated K-State. Was that a highlight game for you?
It really was, but it was almost surreal. I remember we go into the locker room and we're up like 18 or 19 points at halftime. And it's not like, you know, sometimes you see teams just shoot out of their minds and they're making, you know, 10, 15, 20 threes. I mean, we weren't making a lot of threes. I think for the game shot maybe low 40s. But defensively, we were on our game. And I can remember in the second half, I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and my assistant, Ken Dempsey, walks up, and he says, "Hey, Rich, are you going to sub?" And in my head, like there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes to go in the game. And I don't know how many coaches do this. I think probably a lot of us did. You're calculating how many possessions could there be left in this game. And I'm looking at the score.
You're winning by like 40 at this point.
Well, and I'm thinking we're up 18, and my math was not so good. I said, "Kenny," I don't know yet. I don't know if we should call off the dogs. And he says, "Rich, we're up 38." And I'm like, "Oh man, I need a calculator here." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess there's not enough possessions left in the game. Let's let everybody have a chance to play." So I mean, it was one of those games that, you know, where everything seemed to go right on a defensive end. And the other game that sticks out was probably in that fourth year when we had Oral Roberts at home, and we're in the midst of an 11-game winning streak, and the place was packed. And it really, at that point, kind of proved to me something that I didn't think would happen. I really thought that the only way that you could consistently pack Municipal Auditorium was if you went to the NCAA tournament once or twice. And during that stretch, we averaged over 6,000 people, and the place was packed for Oral Roberts, and it was just a great atmosphere. And you know, that's another one that kind of stuck out for me.
Now, you had that run of great conference seasons, and your final what would turn out to be your final season at UMKC. It was a step back, not a tremendously big step back, but it also coincided with the change at athletic director. And you can be as free as you want because we both got fired by the same guy. So it just took me a year later because he misread my contract. But anyway, it was Tim Hall who later obviously got some fame because he was at Maryland, Baltimore County, I believe, when they sprung their big upset. Anyway, I'll tell you this story now. One of the things that he said to me when I got fired, and you know, maybe it was the year before when he really didn't want to keep me around, but he thought it was my option, and it really wasn't. It was a mutual option. He referred to it the Coaches Show, which is one of the greatest coaches shows in the history of coaches shows. I've done a million of them. Many of them are dry. People are spoiled around here because Bill Self does a good coach's show, but most of the time they stink. Let's face it. I've done athletic director shows; they weren't very good, but we made it incredibly fun, and it was incredibly fun because of you. And one thing you used to do is just say at the outset that you buy the first round. Well, you know, people didn't pour in there by the hundreds. There was a few beers that you might buy for a few people, and we had a good time with it. And he said to me, "I can't have my coach buying shots for the bar at my coach's show." And I'm sitting there going, what a jerk. And I knew the writing was on the wall then, but clearly just one slight step back with him on, just being named the athletic director. Did you not see eye to eye personally either, or how do you think that all went down?
It's interesting. And one point on the coaches show, the Llewellyn brothers, who were the host of the shows,
Mm-hmm.
They paid a sponsorship fee, and I felt bad when we weren't drawing a lot of people there. So I'm like, hey, how can we get them here? If it'll help, that was some nights it didn't cost me too much money, but some nights it cost me $200 or $300. That was coming out of my pocket. It wasn't coming out of the school's pocket, and so I wish he had ever mentioned that to me, but he never did. It's interesting to note. He gets the job. I had actually helped him get the job. A mutual friend, the AD at Western Illinois, Tim Van Alstyne, had called me and said, "Hey, Rich, I got a friend who's involved with your job. I don't know if you have somebody in mind." I didn't. And he says, "Could you help him?" So I said, "Sure." So Tim and I, Tim Hall, that is, talked a few times, and I kind of gave him the lay of the land and, maybe some insight. So if there's one thing I regret, is helping him. But in full disclosure, and I have repeated this, and you've heard me say it, Danny, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Because much like you, when you say you had the option year, I had 1 year left in my contract. And when he called me in for our end of the year meeting, I really expected him to say, "Rich, I know this year was not good. You had a couple injuries, blah, blah, blah. There's no excuses. But you got 1 year left. You got to get to the tournament next year." And that's what I fully expected him to say, and I could have lived with that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of much like my friend Barry Hinson in Southern Illinois. I mean, that was basically what happened his last year. And, instead of moving on, he said, "Okay, I'll take that challenge." And I would have been done likewise. But he decided, "No, we're not going to do that. I'm going to make a change." And the only guy who it didn't blindside is my former assistant, Ken Dempsey. And I'll never forget him saying the week before, he says, "Hey, Rich," he says, "are we okay?" I said, "Yeah, Kenny, we got a year left. They're not going to find me out. It's no problem." And he says, "Are you sure?" And he kept bugging me. So finally I said, "All right, Kenny," I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll call Tim and ask him and say, hey, can we move the meeting up to Friday? And, instead of Monday." And so I called him and I said, "Hey, I got to go recruit on Saturday and Sunday, actually Friday night too, but, can we move this year-end meeting up to Friday?" And he says, "No, that's okay. We can do it on Monday." So at that point, I thought, "Oh, okay. He's not moving it up to Friday," and I kind of let it out that I was going recruiting on the weekend. Surely he would have said, "Rich, don't bother going recruiting. Don't spend money." And so lo and behold, Friday I go to Poplar Bluff to see a kid play. On Saturday I drive to Wichita, which, by the way, was my wedding anniversary. I go see a kid play. Now on Sunday I drive back to Poplar Bluff to see the same kid I saw on Friday because he had won. And then Monday I go in to have my meeting, which, by the way, it was my birthday. And I knew I was in trouble when I walked into his office and the director of human resources is sitting at the table.
That happened to me too.
This is not good because he's not there for moral support. That's for sure. So just like you see in all the movies. He slides the paper across the desk and says, "Hey, Rich, we're going to go in a different direction, but we're going to honor your contract." I wanted to jump across the table and, actually I kind of measured it out. Could I jump across the table, put my thumbs on his windpipe, cut off his oxygen flow before the HR guy grabbed me? And then I heard a voice in my head, which was my father. And my dad always said, "Listen, Rich," he said, "if you're going to burn your bridges, you better be a damn good swimmer." and I thought, I don't know how to swim. So I took a different approach. I said, "Well, yes, you're going to honor my contract, meaning you're going to pay me. I understand that, but you're not going to really honor it because you're not going to let me coach." And then the only other thing that I wanted to get out publicly so that the HR guy could hear it, which I didn't really know him, so I don't know if it really made any difference anyhow. I made sure that he knew that I had helped Tim get the job. So, I made that point perfectly clear, that Tim, I'm really a little disappointed that I helped you get this job and now you turn around and fire me. But in any event, as I mentioned, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, I had been a college coach for 25 years, been a head coach for 16, and by having a year off, or a year, I shouldn't say off, but a year where I knew I had money coming in.
Right.
It enabled me to explore some opportunities that I wouldn't have had. Quite frankly, if that would have been the last year of my contract, I would still be in coaching today because I would have went out and I would have gotten a coaching job somewhere and still coach. But this happened to coincide with the very first year of the Big Ten Network. So, I placed some calls and was fortunate enough to get a trial period with the Big Ten Network. Ended up doing, I want to say, a dozen games with the Big Ten, and then switched over to ESPN and the Big 12 Network, and have been doing that for the last 12, 13, 14 years.
You also are an administrator now. I would say you could say a long-time administrator at Arkansas State. You also do a lot of acting, and not as much as you might like. First of all, just briefly, how did you end up scratching that itch?
Well, I blame Terry Mahajer, who was the associate AD at UMKC, who's now my boss and the director of athletics at Arkansas State, which is where he played football, actually. But when I was at American and we got fired, I answered a casting call for the movie Along Came a Spider. And I got cast as an FBI agent. And more importantly, it gave me an opportunity just to be on a movie set for a couple of days. Morgan Freeman, who was the star along with Monica Potter. Morgan Freeman, by the way, terrific guy. He didn't care if you were, setting up the lights or you were an extra or you had one line or whatever. Monica Potter, not so much. So anyhow, I got the experience there. And then when I came out to UMKC, Terry had this crazy idea for marketing that it was just going to be me and the Kangaroo. So we made a couple of season ticket commercials every year, just the Kangaroo and I, and they kind of became a little bit of a hit. We won a Telly Award for one of them, and it really kind of got me going in that area. I mean, to the point where I laughed. I probably had been out of coaching for 2 or 3 years, and I'm on a plane going back to Kansas City, and the guy keeps looking at me. And finally, he says, "Hey, are you the guy from the Kangaroo commercials?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a former basketball coach at UMKC." He says, "Really? You coach basketball too?" And I was like, okay, at least I made an impact somehow. But, so that kind of got me going. Got me a demo reel and started with an agency in Kansas City called Exposure. Now I kind of have an agent throughout the Midwest in St. Louis, Chicago, Tulsa, Atlanta, and I've had some commercial opportunities and some film work, a couple of TV shows, and we'll slow that lead.
And as we speak, you are headed to something else like that. In conclusion, we could sit here and talk for 1,000 hours about some of our experiences, but the podcasts have an unfinite length, but not forever. I want to know that whenever anybody greets you and they ask you how you're doing, you always say fantastic. How did that come about? Because it's so refreshing. You're obviously not always fantastic, but at least you say you are. And most people say I'm doing fine or whatever, but for you, every time it's fantastic. How did that come about?
I wish I could say it was me and nothing but me, but it wasn't. I had a former assistant when I was at the University of North Florida by the name of John Rhodes. John played at Ohio U. He's a terrific assistant. He's now down at IMG Academy. And he was the one who got me hooked on it. Because when I would ask him and he would say he's fantastic, it rubbed off. And I thought, it's so true. Because when people ask you, 9 out of 10, they aren't even listening for the response. And the last person is hoping you say you're miserable because they want to feel better than you. So, I have no other choice. I'm Jimmy Stewart, and it's a wonderful life. It really is. I've had some opportunities come my way and met some unbelievable people. Yourself being one, Danny, because I will say this. There are not a lot of radio hosts out there who would have put up with me during our radio show during that time in Kansas City, because you had no idea where I was going to go with it, and you always played along, and I really always appreciated that. But it's been fun. It really has.
So in closing, in closing for sure, tell me how you're doing right now.
I'm doing fantastic. Now, I say that with a little bit of a caveat, because as you mentioned, I also am the deputy AD at Arkansas State. Well, I supervise and I schedule football. So every day is a new experience with football scheduling right now. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that everything comes through, because we live in interesting times, my friend.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.